Hey guys, this is your host Thomas Tyree here from On the Hot Podcast. Today, I have some bonus content for you guys. The bonus content I will be covering today will be in the sport of football, inside the NFL world. In today's bonus segment, I'll be sharing my thoughts on what the Dallas Cowboys should do with George Pickens heading into the NFL offseason. So, a few weeks away, there's honestly three realistic options on the table for the Dallas Cowboys. Option A will be to re-sign George Pickens to a long-term contract to keep him in Dallas for the next 3 to 5 years. Option B would be to franchise tag George Pickens, put him on a 1-year deal, and that would guarantee George Pickens to remain with the Dallas Cowboys for at least one more season. And then option C, you would have to tag and trade George Pickens. We put the franchise tag on him, and we'd be open to trading him to other NFL teams. That would mean we could possibly get players in return for the trade or more draft capital in the trade for another NFL team to acquire the services of a young, talented wide receiver like George Pickens. So, my thoughts on what the Dallas Cowboys should do. Honestly, it's not rocket science to re-sign George Pickens to a long-term deal and keep him in Dallas. George Pickens has clearly proven that he deserves a long-term deal. Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, let's not play any games here. You got a few weeks to figure this out to give him a long-term contract before free agency. And George Pickens, has shown why he deserves a long-term contract, and it's clearly shown why he could be a number one wide receiver anywhere in the National Football League. But I want him with the Dallas Cowboys because he can help us go after a Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl. And we haven't done that in 30 or so years. I want to see one in my lifetime. But a talented wide receiver, George Pickens, that hasn't even peaked yet, can help us get there. Because this past NFL season, he had 93 catches, over 1,400 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns, and average 15 yards per catch. That is elite production from a wide receiver that has not even cracked 25 years of age yet. But the chemistry that George Pickens and Dak Prescott have together is very remarkable. And when Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens are all on the field together, defensive coordinators are really having panic attacks and losing sleep of how to really game plan for two talented wide receivers like CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens being on opposite sides of each other. And even when CeeDee Lamb was out of the lineup, if you guys remember, CeeDee Lamb suffered a high ankle sprain injury early on in the season. George Pickens for weeks stepped up and picked up the slack with CeeDee Lamb out of the lineup and proved why he could be a number one wide receiver even with the Dallas Cowboys. And he outplayed CeeDee Lamb this previous NFL season. So to me, George Pickens has done everything possible to earn a long-term deal with the Dallas Cowboys. It would be foolish for us to move off of him after what he did with us last NFL season. And to get the long-term contract done, yeah, we're going to have to do some work. We would have to restructure some high contracts that we have of Dak Prescott. I think he would be open to restructure his contract. CeeDee Lamb has a very high contract as well. He's already said in interviews that he's open to restructuring his contract to make sure that his guy, George Pickens, remains in Dallas. Tyler Smith, one of the best offensive linemen in the league. I think he should restructure his deal to help us out. Deron Bland, there's no questions asked. Once we traded Micah Parsons to Green Bay, we paid this man $90 million, and he has not lived up to his contract, healthy or not healthy. He did not look like a number one corner last NFL season, so I think he should restructure his deal. But something I want to address also, last week I seen a lot of people come up with a trade suggestion that we should get on the phone with the Las Vegas Raiders and do a straight-up trade for George Pickens. They received George Pickens, and we received Max Crosby. Now, as good as a player Max Crosby is, hell no, I would not do that trade straight up because George Pickens is only 24 years of age. He has not even cracked the surface of what his peak years are really going to look like in the National Football League. So I would not give up on George Pickens. And Max Crosby, yes, he is one hell of an edge rusher, a top 5 edge rusher in the league. He's 28 years of age, but he's coming off of knee surgery. There is no guarantee if he's going to digress next NFL season. And to get Max Crosby, I wouldn't do a straight-up trade, trading George Pickens to the Raiders and us getting Max Crosby. I think that's going backwards instead of forwards, where you could honestly reach out to the Raiders and see if they're open for them taking our 20th overall pick in the NFL draft to acquire Max Crosby. That's the only way I will acquire Max Crosby. Anything other than that, no. So we can forget that trade, and that's a disservice. That's a disservice to us because realistically, we would be in the same, nearly in the same type of conversation that we were in before we trade for George Pickens. You got an elite edge rusher, but then you need help on the other side of CD Lamb's side of the ball, getting another wide receiver in the draft. So no, that's a no. We should not do that trade, not entertain that trade, and keep George Pickens in Dallas and move on from there. But honest thoughts of us possibly tagging George Pickens. Now, the tag is most likely in this situation. I hate to be the burden of bad news, but the franchise tag is the most likely situation for George Pickens, because if you tag George Pickens to a franchise tag, you have to promise him that he's going to be there for the long haul, and promise him he's not just a one-year rental. And we're not doing this to make headlines like Jerry Jones likes to do whenever a star player of ours is up for a new contract. Just ask Dak Prescott in the past, Ezekiel Elliott in the past, Amari Cooper in the past. Like, we went through this story too many times, bro. You can't play with a talent like George Pickens that's already a hothead, and we found some type of way to contain him. Don't initiate an unnecessary fire heading into free agency. So if you tag him, tell him he's there for the long haul. You just got to work out the finances, because this goes to my point. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if we tag George Pickens, and that's the most likely scenario because we are over the salary cap heading into free agency in a couple weeks. We're actually the third worst team in terms of cap space heading into the NFL offseason, which is really not good. But we can free ourselves up of cap space by a margin if we restructure contracts. Some of the contracts that I just said, again, names like Dak Prescott restructure, CD Lamb restructure, Tyler Smith restructure, DaRon Bland restructure. And we could release players on the defensive side of the ball. If you're not anybody on the interior defensive line, or if you're not overshown at linebacker, anybody is up for grabs to be released, in my honest opinion, on the defensive side of the ball. But anyway, long story short, you do all that stuff and release players, you're looking at $100 million freed up in cap space, which can help us out tremendously. Whether we want to get George Pickens a long-term deal or not, tag him or not, that still helps. But a tag is not the worst thing in the world, because we still also have to re-sign talent like Javonte Williams at the running back position. Javonte Williams was very important for us in the lineup, had over 11 rushing touchdowns for us this previous NFL season. Brandon Aubrey, our kicker, nearly Mr. Automatic in a lot of spots when you don't overuse him. I think that's very important for us to re-sign him. And plus, we still got to rebuild basically everything other than our interior defensive line on the defensive side of the ball. So we have a lot of things to do this offseason. That's why I said a tag is not the worst thing in the world to tag George Pickens, but you cannot go out there and play the social media game or the media game, headlines game. No, not with this player. If you tag him, a long-term deal must be done probably before kickoff, or things could get really bad in Dallas. So again, a tag is not the worst thing in the world, because we still have to re-sign Javonte Williams, re-sign Brandon Aubrey, and rebuild this entire defense. So I think I have a good feeling. I do have a good feeling that George Pickens will be a Dallas Cowboy heading into next year's NFL season, whether it's on the tag for another year, which is not the worst thing in the world, whether it's a long-term contract that puts the burden off of Dallas Cowboys' back, and we get to see George Pickens in Dallas for another 3 to 5 years. I don't see us trading him. I don't see us letting him walk in free agency and entertaining possibly going elsewhere. I don't see that happening. So I think Pickens is here to stay. But we cannot let this get ugly like a scenario last year where Micah Parsons was up for a new deal, Jerry Jones was playing the games, and he requested a trade, and things just got ugly. So I don't want to see that happen again, because if Pickens is out of Dallas, you might as well trade CeeDee Lamb, who's not going to be happy, and you might as well trade Dak Prescott, who is not going to be happy. So no game should be played. I think if Pickens is either tagged, that's a win, or if he's put on a long term, that's an even bigger win. But those are my thoughts on what the Dallas Cowboys should do with George Pickens heading into the NFL offseason. That is all the time I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. This is your host, Thomas Tyree, signing off, and I'll see you guys on next week's episode.